It's time to pour and be filled. Let's get into it.
Hey y'all, it's Rasheité Calhoun. Welcome to the Pour Podcast. Today we're going to talk about the O in Pour, and I have a special guest, Erica Guevara, here with us, and I'm super excited to talk to her about her experience in worship ministry. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do in worship ministry.
Yeah, so I've been in worship ministry since I was a teenager, I would imagine. I started singing when I was 3, but I've grown up in the church, and so I started off kind of like leading specials at offering, and then it developed into more of a worship leader. I had a really great mentor in my early 20s who really helped to develop me into the worship leader, and so led worship at a lot of different places, a lot of different churches. Right now I help out at City of Lights Church, leading worship there every couple of weeks, so it's been a really cool journey.
Love that. So you've been in worship ministry for a while.
Yes.
As have I.
Yeah.
And so we know the good, the bad, the ugly,
Sure.
all of it. Have you ever felt like empty or experiencing burnout in your ministry?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's just a normal thing in ministry. We're humans, and like we can't always feel full all the time. And there are things that happen in our lives where it can drain us, and we still have to kind of like push through that and lead in spite of that. And I've led, through grief, through, frustrations in life. One thing that really stands out to me, when I had my first child, my son, that was a very transitional period for me in ministry and worship leading, because I was used to running at a certain pace and doing things a certain way. And I remember there was, he was pretty young. I wasn't sleeping through the night much. There was a lot of like crying and a lot of me figuring out how to be a mom and how to balance this in ministry. And I was leading worship that morning, and the worship pastor our pastor talked to the team about, we are the ones setting the stage this morning. We are the ones that are kind of pouring out into people, going to be leading the people in worship. So we need to come filled, and just sort of talking about that whole dynamic. And I remember just feeling like, I'm just empty today. Yeah. And I felt like it was on my shoulders. Like I have to be the one to come up on the stage and pour into these people. And I'm so tired. I'm so, exhausted. I don't feel like I've been poured into. And I actually went to him and, just to express to him how I was feeling. Like, you challenged us this morning, and I don't feel like I'm up for that challenge. And it was a cool experience, because then he was able to pray over me, and I was able to be honest about where I was at. And I think sometimes that is the tricky thing, that we can feel empty or burn out, but we don't feel like we can talk about it. We don't feel like we can tell someone about it. And so that was really empowering for me that morning, just to be honest with myself and with my pastor about where I was at, and him being able to pour into me in that moment helped me feel equipped to go and lead worship that day, in spite of everything else that I was dealing with, in spite of how tired I felt, how burnout I felt, and how empty I felt.
Man, I love that so much. That honesty piece is key. I don't think we give ourselves enough space to just be honest about how we're feeling. And girl, motherhood is its own ministry. It's exhausting. And we still have to show up for both ministries, right? To be worship leaders, to be moms and wives. And it is just, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, but it is cool when you can take that time to be honest. And I think it helps empower other people. Like, that person's going through that, and they're, dealing with that, but then they're honest, and it helps me to realize I'm not alone in this. I have someone else that's going through the same thing with me, and then I think that's a way to fill each other up as well.
Yeah. I love that.
I'm so excited to talk about your ministry today, and I know we're going to talk about the O. So what does the O mean in Pour?
The O. So the O is obedience. And it's one that I think when God was like revealing the Pour methodology to me, O was one that felt like, well, yeah, okay, we have to be obedient, right? We know that. I think especially for those of us who are in ministry and come up in church, you got to be obedient.
Right.
But when I went to actually study the word and what it has to say about obedience, number one, there are like actual blessings that are tied to our obedience, that if we are obedient, then God owes us these things, right? And that is something to find joy in. And I think a lot of times when we're feeling empty, at least for me, I kind of have to check myself, right? Are there some things that God is requiring of me that I'm not doing?
Yeah.
And do I need to go back and check those boxes? So that obedience piece is key, especially for those of us who are on the front line and getting up there on that platform, and we're trying to encourage the people of God and deliver a message. It can weigh on you a lot if you know there are areas where God's calling you to do more and you're missing that mark.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Obedience can be so difficult. What advice would you give to people who might be struggling to obey or with that whole aspect of obedience?
The best advice that I can give is to give it to God. Right? I think a lot of times we try to approach obedience on our own, right? And we just can't do it. Like, I can't fix myself, right? God wants us to show up to him at the altar and sort of turn over all of those things that we're struggling with so that he can fix them, right? And there's this amazing and beautiful exchange that happens at the altar when we come to God. And it's sort of that honesty piece, right? Like, God, this is where I am and I am struggling with this and I need you to get me out of it. I need you to help me with it. And then he sort of reaches down as we're reaching up and there's this exchange, right? I'm giving you this thing that I'm struggling with. And in its place, God's going to fill it with something so that you don't just have a hole, because if you leave a hole, you're going to relapse.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, if you leave a hole, then you are ministering out of a place of emptiness.
Out of an empty place.
Yep. And I think a lot of times, too, with obedience, like, we don't really know what's attached to our obedience.
Yeah.
Especially in small and big ways. But if you're up on the platform, you know, like, there can be moments that God's trying to create in a worship service, and being obedient to him in those moments, you don't know what kind of breakthrough is going to come. You don't know what kind of word he might give you that someone needs in that moment. I just wonder, like, one day I feel like we might know, or I hope that God can show us, like, hey, you obeyed in this small way, and there's the ripple effect that happened from that.
Yeah.
And so it is such an important thing to surrender that to him and just to submit that to him, submit that obedience to him.
I love that. That's such a good point. It's like, you don't know what stage you're at. You could be the sun for the plant. You could be watering. You could just be the seed. And sometimes we don't see the end result.
Yeah.
But we know the power of God, right? And we know the work that we're doing. And I think we just have to trust that through our obedience, lives are being impacted and they're being changed. There's so much attached to the work that we're doing. And you also talked about being obedient, like, in those ministry moments. You kind of hinted at that a little bit.
Yeah.
That is hard for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right? Because I'm like, I got my set list. I know the plan. And then the Holy Spirit will start to talk to me. And sometimes it is just hard to just follow that flow. One time that I remember distinctly where I just ignored God and what he was telling me to say, and sung the song, walked off the platform, and that was it. And then the next person that came up to speak said the exact thing that God was telling me to say.
Wow.
And since then, I've been like, okay, God, like, I'll listen. Like, but if you don't do it, someone will. He will get the job done.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's like, that seems like a lesson, but also confirmation. Like, I was hearing your voice. That wasn't just me. Because I think sometimes we can second guess ourselves.
Yes.
But I feel like as we spend more time with God in the Word, listening to his voice, knowing his voice, then we're not second guessing ourselves as much, because we're like, no, I know that's the voice of my Father.
Yeah.
I know this is what he's telling me to do. I know this is what he's calling me to do. I think sometimes for me, I'll feel those stirrings, like as I'm practicing for a set list, or as I'm, I'm a mom. So a lot of times it's in the car, and I'm just like, that's my time to have some quiet, a little bit of peace and quiet. And so in those moments, I feel like I feel God speaking to me and kind of like, hey, this is the direction I want you to go on Sunday. And even then I'm like, we'll see. We'll see what happens on Sunday. But in the moment, it's like God's like, remember, like, I prompted you, I already prepared you, like, go ahead and move forward with that. And I think there's just beautiful things that come out of that. But it is, those quiet moments, I think, spending with him, that help us to be attuned to his voice and to have the courage that comes from the Holy Spirit to obey in those moments.
100%. And we talked about that in the last episode on Prepared, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to do the work to get in the Word. The more that I am in the Word, it's easier for me to discern his voice because it will align with everything that he said. I love that you had the we'll see moment with God, because I kind of have those with God. I'm like,
Well, because you're also like, is this like, am I just trying to like create this really, what I think might be like a really powerful moment, or is this what God is actually wanting to do in that moment, or is He just speaking that to me now? And so it's just, I don't like to have it super scripted when it comes to the things I'm going to say on a Sunday morning, because I'm just like, I want to make sure that it's His voice and not my voice coming through.
Yes.
And so I think there's a little bit of give and take with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I agree.
But what does obedience look like for you in this season? And do you like, how do you feel like you're doing with that? Do you feel like you're missing the mark or hitting the mark? How's that going?
Oh man. So honesty.
Yeah.
There are some areas that I'm struggling with. There are some things that, and I've had this conversation with God, where it's very much a we'll see. Right? God's like, no, I told you I want you doing this. And I'm like, we'll see. Poor was one of those areas where I wanted it to be small. I didn't want it to be something big. I just wanted it to be really teeny tiny. And I think ministry also is something where I'm like, I just want to sing. I can sing. I've been singing since I was a kid. God, that's my thing. Sure. And lately, God has been pushing me and pushing and pushing. And if I'm honest, I've been pushing back. And so obedience is, if there's any piece of the methodology that I'm struggling with right now, it's obedience. And giving God a full yes, not a yes but, not a yes and, not a yes but by the way, right? It's a struggle for me, like a daily struggle. And sometimes I mess up.
Of course.
I am so grateful for God's grace, that it covers me. But I keep telling myself, incrementally, we're going to get better. We're going to get closer to a full 100% yes in all these areas that God is requiring me to check off. And that's just kind of where I am. Yeah.
But God's so patient with us, right? Like, you could just look at so many stories in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, I feel like, where it's like He's asking people to do things. Like He's asking Jonah to go to this place, and Jonah just keeps disobeying or refusing or running the opposite way. And it's like, even through it all, like eventually he does what God asks him to do. Like he doesn't do it perfectly. Everyone always has excuses in the Bible. And I just feel like that's so relatable, because we can feel so incompetent, or like, this is so much bigger than me. And it is, because it's something God's asking you to do. But it's like, if we trust Him, like we know that He's going to work through us and that He's going to grow something in a way that we could never have imagined. But it is hard to submit to Him in that, it is hard to trust that I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm going to walk forward in this thing that you're asking me to do and calling me to do. So that can be definitely very tricky.
It's hard, especially, I think, for those of us who, and I think creatives probably struggle with this more than anyone, because we have a picture in our head. Right? And our mind is always going, and it's like, all right, God, you're telling me to do this, but I feel like I could do it this way because it's going to be really cool. This is what I see in my head, right? We're trying to get to the end result that we see. And God's like, nope, I want you to do it a different way. And we can't always see it. And I'm such a planner, and I'm like, if I can't see it, if it doesn't make sense to me, then Lord, you just come with me and protect me on this path that I've carved out for myself. And let's just do it that way. But He's like, no, right? And He is patient with us. I was... this week in my devotion, I've been trying to focus more on who God is and not what He's done and not what I need Him to do. Life-changing, by the way. I've never done that. Just try to spend all your devotion time on God and who He is. And so I have been studying the attributes of Him, and patience was one that came up. And just in the way that the Bible talks about time, right? God spends a lot of time saying how many years it took for people to do things, how many years they were stuck in a certain space, particularly with the children of Israel, who spent years and years kind of doing things that they shouldn't have done. But then when they get it right, God also talks about the time that it took for them to get it right, the time it took to build the altar, the sanctuary, the temple, right? All of that. And for this week in my devotion, I was like, wow, God is patient with us, and time is important to Him. And that is just such a valuable thing for me to know, that it doesn't matter how long it took.
Right.
God is still right there, like, all right, you're ready. Let's go. Let's do this.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's in charge of the timing of it, even if it doesn't fit within our time frame.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Obedience is, it is something that I think we all struggle. Like you were talking about, oh, it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle for everybody, you know, like, and for me in my season right now, it feels sort of a little opposite, where I feel like God's asking me to be obedient in small ways. And that's been kind of hard for me because I was used to being more obedient in like larger ways. And when I got out of college, I moved to Honduras and lived there for a couple of years. I was used to like big, radical, like so exciting, you know, and then becoming a mom, like I transitioned out of my career and then started staying home full time. It's been about 4 years now. And I sometimes struggle with that, like obedience in that, obedience in like where he's placed me in the season he's placed me in. So I think your obedience it's always submitting to God, but I think it can look different in different seasons. And recently I was practicing for like a worship set on a Sunday in the kitchen. That's the car in the kitchen. That's like they're eating lunch, and I'm like, let's practice for worship. And so I was practicing the song, and like I have 3 kids. They were all singing along, and like my youngest, she's 1.5, and she was like raising her hands and worshiping, and it was such a sweet moment. And God spoke to me so clearly in that moment, and He was like, the most influential platform you'll ever stand on is right here in your kitchen. And it was such a word that I needed in that moment because I think sometimes when God's asking you to be obedient in ways that you think are small, they're actually not. Like they're actually really big, because being home and raising babies and teaching them how to be worshipers and teaching them how to love the Lord and follow after His heart, like that's not a small thing. But I think sometimes the enemy can minimize whatever season we're in by either making it feel small or making us feel filled with doubt and, you know, questioning what it is God's calling us to do. So I love the topic of obedience and how it can just look different in different seasons and what God's calling us to do. Yeah,
I love that so much. Perfect way to bring us to a close for today. Y'all, wherever you are in your season of obedience, whether it feels big or small, just like Erica shared, it's not, right? It all matters to God. So I want to encourage you all, wherever you are in your season, just kind of keep striving, keep pushing, keep trying to make those incremental changes to get as close to perfection as you can, sort of knowing that we're never going to make it there, right? But we serve a God who is so perfect and who is so patient. Thank you, Erica, so much for spending some time with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank y'all for joining, and we'll see you the next episode for The You and Pour.